better management. So in 1957, state legislature developed Department of Natural Resources to manage these lands and develop these trusts that the money would be used for to fund education, schools, kindergarten through 12, universities, institutions, and several other things. Oh, and the Department of Natural Resources is headed by the Commissioner of Public Lands, and currently that is Hillary France.
John, can you put your display in slideshow mode? We can see better.
And how do I do that?
There should be an icon down at the bottom right.
Can you do slideshow here for me? Oh, yeah, I know. There. Thank you. That gonna work? Yeah. Okay. Move forward. So in these public trusts, you have the agriculture. It's kind of broke down into different categories for ag lands, agricultural lands, the forested land, natural heritage lands, which were like state parks and those kinds of things. And then there's the state-owned aquatic lands. And that's primarily where I'm going to go to, is the aquatic lands, because that's the program I work for, is the aquatic invasive species, and that's what our focus is. One of the other responsibilities was to manage or regulate the use of timber, predominantly the harvest of timber throughout the state, both by the department and by private landowners, big timber companies. Likewise with surface mining, to regulate and make sure that to protect the environment during those activities. And then some of the common ways that we develop funding is both through leasing and product sales, sales of timber, sales of gooey ducks. Everyone know what a gooey duck is? There's a lot of money generated in the state of Washington from the sale of gooey ducks. Not everyone knows it's a very large bivalve, big clam. And so in doing this, they decided to have to make some more concise or clear ideas or plans on how we were going to manage this revenue and how it was going to be done. And therein, they had to make, it was by statute or a revised code of Washington, 1710, I think 1726, both deal with the fact that things such as invasive species would be managed, and there would be a process to do that, that it would become law that you had to manage these lands, specifically on state lands, all the forest lands and the aquatic lands and so forth. One of the first ones that brought attention was a grass named Spartina. It's found on the coast because it was affecting a lot of the shellfish growers and turning a lot of the estuaries where all your rivers ran in the bays, Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor. This grass was beginning to take over the tidelands and destroy that ecosystem. And so I think the statute was developed in 1975, and that mandated that the state would then begin the process to try and eradicate Spartina. On the slide, it talks about purple loosestrife, but that wasn't the first focus. It was the Spartina, and the state began working on, and that also is when the Washington State Department of Natural Resources developed the Aquatic Invasive Species Program, because they were the ones that were going to be responsible to go after Spartina. And this slide is just basically about the budget and where some of the money is spent. Spartina is one of the largest, but in the lakes and rivers in water, that takes up, in total, I think right now, we're closer to about $1 million. Our budget's about $1 million a year. It's a little bit more than what this slide represents. And then in order to do a lot of the work that needs to be done, boots on the ground per se, there is that's the Puget Sound Corps group that sends out crews of 5 or 6 people. They're the ones that are running around with backpacks, sprayers on, or shovels, that are doing the actual hands-on work, the labor type work. There's not near enough of them, but we spread them out throughout the state, and they're the ones that can go out and help each county.
How much of that money is spent in Eastern Washington versus Western Washington?
I don't know what the breakdown is on the east side versus the west side. A lot, I would guess that most of it, not most of it, but a fair portion is on the west side, just because of the estuaries with the major rivers that run into the Puget Sound and to the salt water. But I don't know. Good question. Somebody else that's here may have an answer to that. There's a lot of people here with experience have been doing it. I haven't been doing this all that long, and that's a lot of the area on this side is more of the agricultural type of ground, and so I'm focused mostly with the aquatics. And that is the rivers and lakes. And right now we have 4 people in the DNR aquatics invasive species program. There's 4 of us. We're spread out. Have recently been given 21 counties in Eastern Washington to assist. So we're spread pretty thin, and the only way that this works is when we can partner with other people, whether it's the county weed board and the tribes, landowners, volunteers. It's a pretty big concerted effort to manage as they say, eradicate some of these invasive species. And as we go further in here, I'll list a few of the invasive species that are at the top of the list for DNR right now, and probably for some of the counties that are all aquatic. And this is the priorities, and that's really to preserve, eradicate, restore, increase, and build partnerships. Building partnerships is how we're going to get all this done. And trying to preserve the value and the ecological integrity of the land. That's when we have grasses like Spartina that are filling in all the estuaries and the bays and harbors. It has a big impact on the shellfish growers. It's a economical impact, not just ecological. And somewhere in the line, you have to decide which battle you're going to fight, what plant you're going to pick out, fight. They have so many plants that it's sometimes in question on which one needs to be focused on first. And a lot of times we just leave that up to the counties, so the county can decide which, county by county, which plants that they feel they need to focus on the most. And then we partner with them and try and help them the best we can. Most of that is just through funding. Restoring, one of the things that we've begun to do more of recently is also restoration in all these lands because of the damage that these invasive species cause. Takes years and years to get the land back with what it originally was. And this is just a slide that kind of shows how these battles go. This is a picture of a guy standing. It's all Spartina grass that he's standing in. And it crowds out all the native species and the ecosystem and destroys it. So some of the things, the tools that we have to use are airboats, and of course called a marsh master. It's a track amphibious machine that can get around in the marshes or the wetlands. and where we can actually address the issues and battle some of the plants that we're trying to eliminate. And the number one way is, of course, the treat on foot. I mean, the hours and hours and hours that you put in is with a backpack sprayer or a shovel or a machete. You know, it's a lot of work. And this graph just kind of shows how arduous this work is. It back in about 2011, where it starts, they picked out 199 sites with Spartina that were considered to be an infestation or completely infested, and started to work those areas. And some 10 years later, 35% of those 199 sites is considered eradicated, or at least brought down to a level that it doesn't require the management it did to start with. So, you know, really the slide just illustrates how hard it is to actually get an invasive plant under control. It's not a quick, easy process.
I have a question.
Sure.
Once you eliminate it, how do you maintain that?
Well, that's kind of a good question, because my experience so far is we oftentimes throw the term eradicate around a little too loosely, because I don't know if there's any such thing as total eradication. On the Spartina plant, they felt that if you went back and surveyed the area at least 6 times, no more than twice in 1 year, and you didn't find any plants, that would constitute eradicated. This slide right here kind of shows the difference in this gentleman standing in the same place that this guy was. And this is after 2012. And these are the remaining plants, and can simply be treated with just a hand-carried bottle of spray. This was treated with a helicopter originally. They actually flew over and sprayed with helicopters. So, and then I'll move on here to flowering rush, because that's kind of one of the major focuses that we're looking at right now in the DNR's aquatic invasive species. It's one that we feel we need to. There's a chance that we can get this under control, and we feel that's one it's a necessity that we really do need to work on it. And it too is like the rest of the invasive species. It crowds out the native plants that are necessary for a healthy ecosystem, and which in turn kills off some of the animals, the fish, and so forth, and reduces the diversity of the ecosystem also. So it's just one single plant that takes over.
Located around here.
Oh yeah, it's right here in the Ponderay River. There's plenty of it, and it's spreading. Most of these plants come from like plant nurseries, a lot of them anyway. And they spread. People plant them in their yard, or they plant them in their fish pond, and then it spreads to a river, and it goes downriver from there, and it spreads. So originally, you know, it's a pretty plant that's purchased at a nursery somewhere and planted in someone's garden. But once it reaches the ecosystem, then it starts to take over. And the other ones, such as like Spartina, they came from the East Coast, and it was in the ballast of ships that were hauling freight back and forth, and it ended up, you know, dumping their ballast water here, and then that, you know, infested our shorelines. And this picture here shows, it's kind of hard to see the flowers. There's a purple flower that is the flowering rush, and it hides pretty well in the rest of the vegetation that grows here. This is a little further south. This picture was taken down on Long Lake and Lake Spokane. We took that picture last year. I was out with Department of Ecology, and gentleman standing in the front of the boat there in yellow, he's works with the Vista Corporation. He's a biologist, and it's got a lot of work in all the counties with invasive species, and we don't have enough people and enough money to really address it the way it needs to be addressed. So
Is that something that you can do some type of dredging equipment to go along the shoreline?
There is, and there's a gentleman that's going to speak here today that has done some of that, and they use divers to actually suction the plants up and the rhizomes, the roots of it.
Right.
Terry. But it's still, most of these plants have roots that fragment, and if you're not careful, you really end up spreading the plant instead of just eliminating it. So you've got to really be careful and know what you're doing when you go after them. Knotweed, I don't think there's a lot of knotweed over on the east side, but on the west side there's a lot of it. It really does choke out a stream fairly quickly. A lot of this stuff starts out in the headwaters of a stream, and eventually it just reduces the rest of the vegetation that would normally be growing on those creek banks. Knotweed is one that crowds out the native trees, so the small saplings and the seedlings don't actually have a chance to grow, which creates the shade for the streams and also the woody debris that then, you know, eventually falls down and ends up being part of the ecosystem. And like a lot of them, it's fragments, but it also gets spread by animals too. And it's just difficult to control. It's a rather large plant. You can see how big it grows in a lot of these areas, and it really can take over a stream bank and do a lot of harm, and it crowds everything else out, so you're down to just that plant. And this is a drone. It's one of the new tools that we've just started using, and it's been somewhat effective. It's got its limitations. You know, there's places you can't fly it. You've got to have people licensed to be able to fly them, and they do help in some of the areas that we survey for these plants, because most of these areas are really difficult to get around in. You can't just walk into some of these marshes, and they're not accessible by boat. And using the drone and some newer technology, LiDAR, we can actually map areas and identify plants by their color, shapes, and so forth. And then we can fly through and actually map and identify the invasive plants from the native plants, and then be able to see what's there and know what we're going after. Pretty effective tool. And this is just a map of one of the areas over by in Grays Harbor, Ocean Shores, where we had a natural preserve that was just loaded with several different plants, specifically knotweed, and we were able to fly the drone through and actually really pick up some really good pictures, and that was kind of the experimental location that we did it, and it seems to work. It's going to take some while to develop all this and to develop some good software to be able to use it and do it, but it's working. I think everyone's familiar with yellow flag iris over here in this area. It's all over the rivers and banks, and some people like it. They think it's pretty, but again, it's one of those plants that chokes everything else out, crowds everything else out. Grows pretty fast too. It's amazing how quickly it will grow, take over a whole stream. But and that's one that we have on both sides. It's on the east side and west side just as bad. We work hard, put a lot of time in on that one too. Purple loosestrife, probably everyone's familiar with that one too. We have it everywhere, and it's another one that, because of how it grows and where it grows, it's tough to get to it and eradicate it. But these are plants that are kind of at the top of our list that we're going after, that we spend most of our funding on in time. Reed canarygrass. It has become a problem in a lot of streams where it takes over, and it turns basically your wetlands into dry lands at a given time. It's a tough one. It's everywhere. The policeman's helmet, same thing. It grows pretty big and it crowds everything else out. You can see how the patches of it just completely crowds everything else out. That's the issues that we have with them. And then these are more of your submerged plants. People are probably pretty familiar with some of these, like the Brazilian Elodea, and you'll be like swimming in those areas where they get tangled around their feet and your boat propellers, and the Eurasian Milfoil. And I think Terry McNabb's going to talk a little bit. They came out. It sounds like there's what we call kind of a silver bullet that's just coming out, a chemical that goes after milfoil. And it's a very good product. It's pretty new, very new. Fragrant Waterlily, again, this is stuff that escapes from people's fish ponds, you know, and it ends up out in the environment, and it causes a problem. And it's very expensive to get rid of. It takes a lot of time. This is just some of the equipment we use. This is what I was talking about as far as the amphibious track machine, where we can get around out in some of the areas and apply treatments. Without it, it'd be impossible to get to some of these areas. Phragmites, there's a lot of that in this area, all over eastern Washington. I'm seeing big. These are just, now it's just show and tell kind of, you know. Floating yellow heart, I don't know if anybody's familiar with these. There's, I think, one of the, supposed to be the biggest actual patch of it in Lake Spokane. But it's pretty well widespread. And the pepperweed, it's become a target for DNR and for probably a lot of other people. A lot on the west side of the mountains. And kind of just a couple of the animals, not plants. And again, I work with the aquatic invasive species, so we do have a few of the animals. One of them is burrowing shrimp, which again causes a lot of issues for the shellfish growers. And it gets a lot of attention because we get a lot of money from the lease of shellfish land that the DNR does. And that money goes to fund a lot of the projects that we need to fight invasive species. So we have to protect that resource or that revenue. And I don't know if you've all heard about the green crab, the European green crab. It's just newly been found. Not newly, but it's been a few years back. But it's starting to show up here in Puget Sound, and it too is really hard on shellfish. It kills the shellfish and non-native. Along with fighting with the invasive weeds, we also help out on other projects. This slide here is just a slide. I don't know if you all remember the big slide that took place over on the Skykomish River, the town called Oso, and it took out a lot of homes and killed a lot of people. We actually took some of our machines in and helped with the recovery process in that. Without the marsh masters, it was just impossible to get around through that mudslide with all the water and logs, just all liquefied mud. But, anyway, these are a few of the people. Todd Fowler, it's shown here. He wasn't able to make it. He had some personal issues that prevented him from coming. Todd Brownlee, he spends most of his time in Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor, you know, with Spartina and a few other invasive plants on the mouth of a couple of the rivers. This is myself in blue, and then one of the other coordinators, Nikki McNaughton. And that's the four of us that work on this program. So we can't get a lot done on our own, so we do require, you know, partnerships to get this done. And the final is, of course, this is Blaine Reeves. He's the assistant division manager for the aquatic operations. He's also the vice chair for the Washington Invasive Species Council. And I think that's it for me. Questions, if I can answer. Yeah?
These people, do they have a particular area that they work in mostly, or are they spread out through the entire state?
We're kind of broke up into three areas. Myself, I'm east side, and Mickey works mostly the northwest, King County, Whatcom County, and the further counties to the north, and then Todd Brownlee is the northeast section. So mine's actually the biggest area, but and I'm fairly new. I just came into this program about 2 years ago, so I'm really learning a lot quickly, and you know, making new acquaintances. And that's part of the reason I think I got shuffled into that. He wanted me to get over here and get to meet some people throughout eastern Washington and see everyone and get my face out there. Then Todd, he spends most of his time in Olympia, our fourth person. He is the program manager, and it keeps him quite busy. He actually manages several other programs too, along with aquatic invasive species. So, yeah, we pretty much rely on the counties and their connections on what we can do, where we can get to work. We had, yeah, you got.
I just have a question. So one of the priorities that you said was to eradicate and reduce large-scale infestation. How does DNR define a large-scale infestation?
Well, a lot of times it has to do with the impact it has on either the ecosystem or on down the line. There are, and it depends on what level of weed, what class it falls into. There are some that, and part of what that leaves out is, if it's something that there's a chance we can get a handle on it, we're more focused on funding money that direction. If it's something that it's already beyond the point of being able to, there's things like thistles and Scots broom on the east side that the counties themselves just say that the money is not well used to fight those plants, because there probably isn't going to be, until we come up with a new way. There's always something new coming down the pipe on this. Several of the plants there actually have what's called their biological controls, which are organisms that actually, the knotweed. There's a sap-sucking beetle or a bug that actually kills that plant. It doesn't affect any of the other plants at all, and it's pretty effective. There's, believe it or not, like a spotted mold or mildew that kills the plant also, and it's way more effective than trying to go out, and have a team of people try and combat it. But back to your question, the state doesn't really, the DNR doesn't really pick or choose the infestation as much as we allow the county to. It's what the counties come to us and say, hey, we would like to help. If we could, we need to get some funding to help, fight this plant or this weed. That clarify it for you?
What specific herbicides are you using for milk?
Well, I can't really answer that one. I think that there are several other people here today that could answer that better for you. I don't know, Sharon or Terry McNabb, he knows a lot about it. I don't actually do the application work on those. I think there might be some discussion in a little bit later here today. They'll answer that question for you.
I believe so too.
I don't even know what these plants are. What is milfoil? Is that stringy one that goes by the shore that hangs around and just everything?
Well, there are several different varieties that all look somewhat similar, but it is a submerged plant that does grow in a thick. I think somebody's going to have some pictures of it here before I don't have I had one picture here.
We'll have some more identification. We'll have some hands-on identification.
They might have some live plants show up here too.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I would assume because it's everywhere. It's in all the streams, and it's a nuisance.
I was curious about the slide on the fragrant waterlily. That would grow in the same habitat as the native yellow pond lily and other floating plants. Is it so aggressive that it actually crowds the native plants out?
It sure does. Yep.
And that would be restricted by what water depth?
Well, that all, I don't know. I don't know how that particular species works, and I do know that there are some. It's not going to be. It's found in fairly deep. I think it's kind of deep, but it's all on the surface. That one. So.
And if we can kind of repeat questions for people on Zoom, so they know what you're talking about when you answer.
Okay. What?
Oh, when people out here ask questions.
Oh, you want me to
People on-
repeat the question so
Yeah,
somebody that's
so that
listening or
the
can
people
hear?
on-
Okay, I see.
Know what
Yeah,
you're
got from there?
Thank you.
So you're decorating Eastern Washington.
Yes.
How many acres does DNR control in Eastern Washington that you have to cover?
Boy, I have no idea what the actual acreage is. It's quite a bit. DNR itself has about 5.6 million acres that DNR owns, or the state of Washington owns, and about 2.6 million acres are aquatic lands that have to be managed. So it's quite a bit.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question. Kind of like a Jeopardy.
It's quite challenging to try and do a live workshop and a virtual one at the same time, so we appreciate everybody's patience.
John,
Yes.
they just posted that as of midnight last night, DNR was closing all recreational lands. Now, is that something that they coordinated with Forest Service and everybody else, all other state agencies? So-
I couldn't say for sure on that. I just know that once there's enough fires burning and all of our resources are out in the field and they're running out of resources and they can't catch the fires, they say, well, we need to restrict the public use so we don't have, you know,
I have a Forest Service map that indicates DNR properties. And problem with it is in order to get to those properties, you're having to go through private, you're having to go through Forest Service. So, you know, how do you restrict yours without restricting?
I don't know. I don't know if they can. I mean, other than just post it, and that's, so, you know, they wouldn't be closing the actual gate or road. It would just be posted.
And then somebody has to enforce it.
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of enforcement personnel either, so.
Not if you have 4 people.
So your budget is approximately $1 million a year. I mean, that is kind of sad and pathetic actually, because there's just not a whole lot of money. So where else do you guys pull from funding to help control some of this stuff?
For aquatic, that's all we have.
That's all you have.
That's all we have, and most of that is generation sales medium. Our funding.
Really?
Yeah. And there's been times, even like with this COVID, that it slowed down the sale of the doing that, not so much the sale, but the actual transport and moving it. So it becomes detrimental to our program when the funding that comes from shellfish is reduced.
So none of our taxes are in those towards aquatic, or you just don't want to go there?
I'm not the best person to talk to you about that, but, you know, yeah, I don't want to go there, but no, that's not where, you know, that's not where Aquatic is. It's their funding.
I have a question. Is it DNR that has the rule or made the rule, the law that you can't do any work by waterfront so many feet from the water to your property? Like if you get the 25 feet, you can't take a bush down, you can't take a tree down, you can't. And wouldn't it seem logical that if everyone has their property, that if they took care of their own spot, that would help everybody? If we're allowed to get in there and do some work?
Possibly. I don't work in that program. That's not, I don't work in any of the permitting or licensing or anything for that kind of work. I know the county has to regulate a lot of that. Army Corps of Engineers regulates a lot of that. Maybe even Department of Ag and Department of Ecology and